statistics I cited were not reliable. You then proceeded to say not only were they not reliable, but they actually were the opposite of the truth, and that we can know that somehow. How do you know that? I mean, it's one thing to say the statistics are unreliable, it's another thing to say that they are anti-reliable.
I did not say they were anti-reliable. I said that we have shown that there's a tendency for believers, or for all human beings, to exaggerate to pollsters, to survey takers, on the phone or however it's being taken. There is that tendency, and we can't deny that. Statisticians and surveyors know that young people underreport substance abuse, for example, because it's socially undesirable. So I wasn't saying that we can just plug that into the equation. What I'm saying is there are studies that show, and I have it here, I'll have to look it up, but actual research where the reports that people have given in surveys, that, for example, that 40% report of church attendance, actually don't match empirically with the real world. So you can have a study that says, here's what people report, right? But surveyors know that that actual reporting doesn't actually match the real world. It's either too high or too low in some way. So I was pointing out that empirical research showed that Christians were, in fact, doubling their report of church attendance, which means that if that holds, that it's only half that are reporting it. That means that on any given non-holiday weekend, 4 out of 5 Americans are not in church. Do you happen to know what percentage of your church tithes? No. I mean, it's just rhetorical. You probably don't. When they actually look at churches, look at the ones that they're allowed to look at, it's about 3%, even though 17% say they do. So I'm basing my conclusions on actual empirical data, not on survey data.
Dan Barker, wanting a question from Mr. Curry.
Let me find my place here.
Before you do, I should apologize. I keep calling you Dan Barker, Mr. Curry. I know Dan, so it's force of habit, but I'll try to be better as a moderator.
I feel disrespected, you know?
Atheist, no more compass.
Well, then I guess I would just ask kind of a quick question. I'm sure you're familiar with George Barna and his research. He's written a lot of books, The Second Coming of the Church, for example, in which he admits, as a born-again Christian, as a sociologist himself, he admits that we as a church are not cutting it. We have higher divorce rate. We have higher crime. We have less reported happiness is what he finds in his surveys. So what do you say to the fact that born-again Christian sociologists are agreeing that Christians really are not any better? In many cases, they are worse off. What do you say to George Barna?
Yeah, I think that George Barna should stop being Chicken Little. There is, as you said, a human tendency to skew results to some extent. And I don't think that George Barna is skewing his results. I think that he's accurately reporting what he has to say. But he is carefully selecting the data that he conveys. So he's not dishonest, but he's selective.
How do you know that?
Because, according to Bradley R.E. Wright, a sociologist at the University of Connecticut, reviewing this kind of literature has found that while it may be true that self-identified Christians have, for example, worse divorce rates than self-identified atheists, if one actually looks at people who are living or walking the talk, people who are going to church on Sunday, maybe even doubling the fake attendance, the numbers reverse themselves. Those people who actually bother to live out their faith in even the most minimalistic of ways relative to church attendance, they suddenly have much better marriage rates relative to those who have no religion.
I have to wait to respond.
Yeah, in your closing, please, Mr. Barker. Mr. Barker. Mr. Curry, you have one last question for Mr. Barker.
Yeah, Dan, you've mentioned that there's this doubling effect on reported church attendance and things like that. And you put it forward as if this were a problem for me and not for you. But how can that be the case if the implication of that is, if, according to surveys, attending church twice a week leads to a 7.6-year increase in lifespan, it seems that you're saying that it's a possibility only with once-a-week attendance.
Well, I did throw some question upon the church attendance and health studies, and I do have it here. It's a study out of Florida, which shows that people who are sick can't get to church. People who are less healthy, especially among the elderly, that skews the numbers. Obviously, if you're too sick to go to church, you're not going to be counted as a healthy churchgoer. So, in my way of thinking, you seem to be using the no true Scotsman fallacy. It's only the ones who are actually healthy that we're going to count. We're not going to count the ones who are not healthy, who don't show up at church. So it makes sense that people who live in a certain culture where they're likely to get up and go to any event, let's say, are going to be healthy people. So again, that doesn't touch on whether Christianity is true or not. And I guess during closing I will ask you, how do you connect the dots? How do you connect the dots between that and actual Christian teachings from the Bible?
All right. We'll now move into closing arguments. 6 minutes. The first will be Mr. Curry. Wherever you're most comfortable.
Well, I'm halfway here already, so. All right, at the end of this, I'd like to summarize some of the flow of our debate today. At the beginning, I stated that I wanted to lay out 5 ways in which Christianity is making the world a better place, ways in which the world is better with Christianity. And I mentioned health, I mentioned crime rates, I mentioned happiness, sex, and philanthropy. Now, in support of these claims, I presented data derived from scientific studies conducted by university-based experts and published in mainstream peer-reviewed academic journals. And while Dan has said quite a lot this afternoon, most of it wasn't really all that germane. Much of it was about a topic which is not the topic of today's debate, about the past as opposed to the present, and some of it was even factually inaccurate, as I've tried to point out on several occasions now. Now, Dan may be willing to look at the data that I've presented and to simply wave it away. Simply say, no, studies show 80